My family banished me to the freezing garage on Thanksgiving, until they discovered I secretly owned the house. The carving knife slipped in my trembling hand as my sister's words sliced through the Thanksgiving dinner conversation like a blade through warm butter. "It's honestly heartbreaking watching some people waste their entire lives," Vanessa announced, her emerald eyes sliding toward me with that familiar look of manufactured sympathy. "Heather, maybe you should ask Mr. Morrison about janitorial positions at his firm. At least it's steady work with benefits." Mr. Morrison, Vanessa's boss and our unwelcome dinner guest, let out a hearty chuckle, his bourbon sloshing dangerously in Mom's finest crystal tumbler. The sound of their shared amusement seemed to echo and multiply as blood rushed to my ears like a tsunami of embarrassment. I felt my chest tighten as I watched my parents exchange that look, the one that had haunted me for 8 long years since I'd abandoned their carefully laid plans for my life. My iPhone buzzed silently against my thigh. The 6th urgent notification from the board of directors about tomorrow's emergency meeting. The meeting that would determine whether Morrison and Associates survived the upcoming restructuring. The meeting that required only my signature to proceed. My name is Heather, I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how I stopped hiding my astronomical success from the family that had spent nearly a decade defining me solely by my perceived failures. I hadn't planned to reveal anything tonight. For 7 painstaking years, I'd maintained the elaborate charade of mediocrity, the humble part-time job at the local library, the cramped studio apartment above Mrs. Patterson's bakery, the ancient Toyota Corolla that wheezed and rattled down every street. All while quietly building Apex Holdings into a multinational empire that had discreetly acquired Morrison and Associates through a subsidiary 18 months ago, completing the full integration just this past spring. "The basement's all set up for you, sweetie," Mom chirped, breaking through my swirling thoughts like a hammer through glass. "We found an old space heater down there since Brittany needs the guest room. She's expecting twins, you know." As if pregnancy automatically trumped basic human decency and hospitality. The entire dining room fell into that peculiar kind of silence that only comes when everyone pretends they're not listening while simultaneously hanging on every single word. This had become their annual tradition, their twisted form of holiday entertainment, watching Heather get systematically put in her place like some kind of family sport. "The basement," I repeated, keeping my voice carefully neutral despite the November chill already seeping through the old farmhouse windows. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Mom sighed, passing the sweet potato casserole without bothering to meet my eyes. "There's a perfectly good heater down there, and honestly, it's not like you're not accustomed to modest living arrangements by now." I thought about my sprawling penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, the beachfront estate in Martha's Vineyard, the private mountain retreat in Colorado I'd purchased just last Christmas, all carefully concealed behind layers of shell companies and discrete ownership structures that would make a Swiss banker proud. "The basement sounds perfect," I said evenly, cutting my turkey into methodical, precise pieces. "I'm sure it's more comfortable than what most of my library patrons deal with." Vanessa's smile widened like a cat who'd just spotted a particularly plump canary. She absolutely lived for moments when I mentioned my humble library job, more ammunition for her ongoing narrative about my spectacular failure to launch into respectable adulthood. "That's exactly the right attitude," she purred, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the warm candlelight as she reached for her wine glass. "At least you've learned to accept your limitations gracefully." But what Vanessa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow's board meeting would determine her boss's fate, and I held all the cards. After dinner, Vanessa personally escorted me to the basement, her designer heels clicking against the wooden stairs like a countdown timer to my humiliation. The concrete space felt like a tomb despite the ancient space heater rattling ineffectively in the far corner, throwing off about as much warmth as a birthday candle in a snowstorm. They'd managed to locate a decrepit army surplus cot wedged between Dad's dusty golf clubs and towers of moldering Christmas decorations. A paper-thin blanket lay folded at one end, probably rescued from the deepest recesses of some forgotten linen closet. "Breakfast tomorrow is promptly at 8, Vanessa announced, her voice echoing off the bare concrete walls like we were standing in a mausoleum. "Please try to brush off any dust or cobwebs before you come upstairs. We wouldn't want you tracking dirt through Mom's clean house." As the basement door clicked shut above me with the finality of a prison cell, I pulled out my phone. 7 increasingly frantic emails from my board of directors demanded immediate attention before tomorrow morning's emergency session. The same meeting where Vanessa's beloved boss would be presenting his quarterly performance reports, completely oblivious to the fact that his year-end bonus, and continued employment, depended entirely on my personal approval. I allowed myself a small smile as I began typing my responses in the dim basement light. Vanessa had absolutely no idea that her supposedly brilliant boss, Mr. Morrison, had spent the last 6 weeks desperately attempting to schedule a face-to-face meeting with the notoriously elusive CEO of Apex Holdings, the parent company that had quietly acquired his firm last year like a chess master capturing a pawn. My phone buzzed with a text from my executive assistant. Mr. Morrison called again, asking about meeting you before tomorrow's board session. Should I maintain that you're still in London? No, I typed back quickly. Tell him I'm reviewing his department's performance metrics tonight. Let him sweat a little. I changed into fresh clothes, carefully concealing my silk designer blouse beneath a worn cardigan that had seen better decades. The basement felt like a meat locker, but I'd endured far worse conditions during my early empire building days, sleeping on office floors and surviving on vending machine coffee, while Vanessa had been climbing her corporate ladder one small promotion at a time. While my sister spent her evenings bragging about each incremental advancement to anyone who would listen, I'd been systematically acquiring companies, restructuring entire industries, and building something far more substantial than anyone in my family could even begin to imagine. The irony was delicious. They'd relegated me to the basement of a house I could buy with pocket change, treating me like the family failure while I controlled their professional destinies from the shadows. I pulled up the Morrison & Associates files on my tablet, reviewing the quarterly reports that would dominate tomorrow's discussion. The numbers told an interesting story, one that Vanessa wouldn't enjoy hearing. Her recent innovative restructuring of the client services department had actually cost the firm nearly $2.8 million in lost accounts and operational inefficiencies. As CEO, I received detailed daily reports on every departmental change, especially those spearheaded by mid-level executives like my dear sister. The space heater wheezed and rattled like it was taking its final breaths, but I barely noticed the cold anymore. Tomorrow would change everything, and I was going to savor every single moment of revelation. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I climbed the basement stairs and entered the dining room, taking my assigned seat at the far end of the table, as distant from the important guests as geography would allow. Vanessa had positioned herself prominently near the head of the table beside Mr. Morrison and his perfectly coiffed wife, laughing melodiously at something undoubtedly witty he'd just shared. "Heather," Dad called out with forced enthusiasm, Vanessa was just telling us about her latest promotion, Senior Director of Client Relations. Isn't that absolutely wonderful news? I nodded politely, accepting the plate of leftover turkey being passed in my general direction like I was receiving charity. Congratulations, Vanessa. Apex Holdings must be incredibly impressed with your innovative work. Mr. Morrison's chest puffed out with obvious pride. She's genuinely one of our rising stars. The acquisition by Apex last year has created tremendous opportunities for talented individuals like Vanessa. The acquisition? Mom asked, perking up with interest. We were initially worried when we heard Apex had purchased the company, but everything's worked out so beautifully. Though honestly, nobody seems to know anything concrete about Apex's CEO. Quite mysterious, don't you think? Vanessa leaned forward eagerly, practically vibrating with insider knowledge she was dying to share. According to office rumors, she's this incredibly reclusive billionaire who never makes public appearances. Some people claim she lives in London. Others insist she operates from Tokyo. Nobody at our level has ever actually met her face to face. I took a careful sip of orange juice to conceal my growing smile. If only they realized that the mysterious CEO they were gossiping about so freely was sitting right there at the end of their table, having been banished to sleep in their basement like some unwanted relative. I heard she's absolutely brilliant, Mr. Morrison offered, warming to the topic. Supposedly transformed at least 15 major corporations in the past 6 years. Built Apex from absolutely nothing into what it is today. Well, Vanessa said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand, she can't be that brilliant if she's hiding from everyone like some kind of hermit. Probably just another trust fund baby who got lucky with daddy's connections. Just then, Mr. Morrison's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, and I watched his face turn several interesting shades of pale. Excuse me, I need to take this call immediately. He stepped into the hallway, but his increasingly agitated voice carried clearly into the dining room like he was speaking through a megaphone. Yes, I have all those reports prepared for this morning's board meeting. No, I still haven't been able to arrange a meeting with the CEO. Yes, I understand how critical this is. She's still unreachable in London. Mr. Morrison returned to the table looking like he'd just received news of his own execution, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Vanessa, ever eager to impress and fill any awkward silence, immediately launched into another self-congratulatory story about her recent professional achievements. "I just completely revolutionized our entire client services framework," she boasted, cutting her turkey into precise, identical pieces. "Saved the company millions of dollars in operational costs." Under the table, I discreetly checked my phone, pulling up the actual financial impact report from that particular project. Vanessa had indeed made changes that had cost the firm nearly $2.8 million in lost clients and operational inefficiencies over the past 3 months. But she had no idea I'd been watching those numbers decline week after week, waiting for precisely the right moment to address the situation. Today felt perfect. "More coffee, Heather?" Mom offered, probably hoping to keep me quietly occupied while Vanessa basked in her moment of professional glory. "Though maybe you should consider switching to tea, given your financial circumstances." Vanessa let out a tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Absolutely. Library assistants should really monitor their spending habits more carefully. Every dollar counts when you're living paycheck to paycheck." Mr. Morrison's phone erupted with another urgent call. This time, when he checked the caller ID, his face went completely ashen, like he'd just seen a ghost walking through the dining room. I need to take another call. Emergency business situation." As he practically sprinted from the room, I could hear him through the thin walls, his voice rising to near panic levels. "Please, I'm begging you, just 5 minutes with the CEO before this morning's board meeting. The future of my entire department depends on this conversation." I'd specifically instructed my assistant to begin sending him a carefully orchestrated series of increasingly urgent messages about today's meeting. Perhaps slightly cruel, but after enduring years of watching Vanessa use her position to lord superiority over me, I felt entirely justified in enjoying some theatrical justice. "Speaking of business developments," Uncle Charlie interjected from across the table, "did everyone hear about Apex's latest acquisition? They just completed a hostile takeover of Richardson Industries for $18 billion. Vanessa sat up straighter, her competitive instincts immediately activated. "Really? Richardson was one of our biggest industry competitors. I had no idea." "Completely blindsided them," Aunt Martha added with obvious relish. "Richardson's board never saw it coming. This mysterious CEO, she's absolutely ruthless in business dealings." I thought about the Richardson acquisition, remembering those endless late nights spent strategizing, the careful choreography of asset movement, the precise timing required for success. Ruthless wasn't the word I would have chosen to describe my approach. Strategic, certainly. Determined, absolutely. But ruthless seemed unfairly harsh. Mr. Morrison burst back into the dining room, looking like he might collapse from stress. "The CEO is calling an emergency pre-board meeting for 9 o'clock this morning. All department heads are required to attend with their quarterly performance reports." Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate like a gunshot. "What? But today's Thanksgiving. It's a national holiday." "She doesn't care about holidays," Mr. Morrison replied weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's conducting a comprehensive review of all recent departmental restructuring initiatives. Vanessa, bring every document related to your client services overhaul." The perfect moment had finally arrived. I cleared my throat softly, just loud enough to cut through the mounting tension. "Mr. Morrison," I said calmly. He looked up, seemingly startled to hear my voice from the far end of the table. "Yes." "The meeting's actually scheduled for 9:30, not 9 o'clock. And Vanessa won't be needing those reports." I paused for dramatic effect. "I've already reviewed them thoroughly." The entire dining room fell into absolute silence, the kind of quiet that precedes earthquakes and revelations. Vanessa let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "What are you possibly talking about? You don't even work for Apex Holdings." I stood up slowly, smoothing my simple cardigan with deliberate care. "Actually, I do work for Apex. In fact." I smiled, watching recognition begin to dawn in Mr. Morrison's widening eyes. "I am Apex." I turned to face Mr. Morrison directly, enjoying the way his mouth had fallen open like a fish gasping for air. "Those performance reports you've been desperately trying to get to me? I received them last Tuesday. We need to discuss the Q3 projections. They're off by approximately $32 million. Mr. Morrison's voice came out as barely a whisper. You're Heather Chun, CEO of Apex Holdings? Yes, I replied, allowing my smile to widen as I watched Vanessa's face drain of every trace of color. Though most people in the business world simply call me Ms. Chun. Mom's coffee mug slipped from her trembling fingers, crashing to the floor and sending ceramic shards and hot liquid across the hardwood. Nobody moved to clean up the mess. They were all too stunned to process basic motor functions. This is impossible, Vanessa whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. This has to be some kind of elaborate joke. I pulled out my phone, connecting it to the dining room's smart TV system. Within seconds, my official company profile filled the large screen in high definition. My photograph, my executive title, my company credentials, everything displayed in crystal clear detail. No joke, Vanessa, I said quietly. While you were climbing the corporate ladder one rung at a time, I was busy building the entire skyscraper. But you're just a library worker, Mom stammered, still staring at the television screen like it was showing footage of aliens landing in the backyard. I volunteer at the library one afternoon per week, I corrected her gently. Because I believe in community service and supporting public education. The rest of my time is devoted to running one of the largest private equity firms in North America. Vanessa pushed back from the table so violently that her chair toppled backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. You can't possibly be telling the truth. You live in that tiny apartment above the bakery. You drive a beat-up Toyota. I own the entire building where my tiny apartment is located, I replied with a casual shrug. As for the Toyota, it's environmentally responsible transportation. Unlike your BMW that you probably shouldn't have charged to the company expense account last month. Mr. Morrison had sunk so deeply into his chair that he seemed to be trying to disappear entirely, no doubt replaying every condescending comment he'd made during meetings about the mysterious CEO. His face had progressed through several interesting color changes, finally settling on a sickly green. The basement, he muttered, his voice filled with dawning horror. We made you sleep in the basement. Yes, I said softly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. You did exactly that. All of you were so busy judging me based on superficial appearances that you never bothered looking any deeper than the surface. I turned specifically to face Vanessa. Remember 3 weeks ago when you denied Jennifer in accounting time off for her daughter's emergency surgery? Vanessa nodded mutely, her earlier smugness completely evaporated. I personally approved her medical leave and arranged for her to see the best pediatric specialist on the East Coast, I continued. Because that's what real leaders do, they take care of their people, especially during crisis situations. Dad finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. Why didn't you tell us the truth? Why keep it secret for so long? Would it have made any difference? I asked, meeting his gaze directly. Would any of you have treated me differently if I hadn't achieved success according to your specific definition of worthiness? This family has always measured human value by brand names, bank account balances, and social status markers. I gestured around the room. I wanted to build something meaningful, something that actually matters in the world. Not just accumulate symbols of wealth to impress people at dinner parties. I turned back to Mr. Morrison, who looked like he was seriously considering making a run for the nearest exit. The board meeting this morning will proceed exactly as scheduled. We'll be discussing the client services restructuring that cost us $2.8 million, among several other pressing operational concerns. My gaze shifted deliberately to Vanessa. I suggest everyone comes prepared to discuss actual results rather than theoretical improvements. You're going to fire me, Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible. No, I replied, beginning to gather my belongings from the table. I'm going to do something I should have implemented years ago, hold you accountable to the same professional standards we apply to every other employee. I walked toward the doorway, pausing to address the room one final time. Success isn't measured by job titles or corner office square footage. Real success comes from integrity, innovation, and producing tangible results that benefit everyone involved. I headed toward the basement to collect my overnight bag, listening to the chaos erupting behind me like a symphony of confusion. Mom's breathless protests, Vanessa's desperate denials, Mr. Morrison's frantic attempts at damage control through increasingly panicked phone calls. One more thing, I said, pausing at the basement doorway. I won't be sleeping in your basement tonight. I have a suite reserved at the Marriott downtown. I smiled. Which I happen to own, by the way. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. As I drove away in my environmentally conscious Toyota, my phone immediately began buzzing with incoming messages from various family members. Apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to rewrite the evening's history. I ignored every single notification. This had been years in the making, and I'd earned the right to savor this moment of truth without interference. The next morning, I sat at the head of Apex Holdings' main conference room, watching as Vanessa and Mr. Morrison filed in with the other department executives. Gone was my sister's trademark arrogant superiority, replaced by something that looked remarkably similar to genuine respect mixed with barely concealed terror. Before we begin reviewing quarterly performance metrics, I announced to the assembled group, I want to address something fundamental about our company culture. Specifically, how we treat people regardless of their apparent status, job title, or personal background. I made deliberate eye contact with each person around the polished conference table. Success in business isn't just about profit margins and quarterly earnings. It's fundamentally about character, integrity, and how we choose to treat the people who depend on us for their livelihoods. For the first time in her entire professional career, I noticed Vanessa actively taking notes instead of simply waiting for her turn to speak. 6 months later, I received an elaborate invitation printed on expensive cardstock. Mom was hosting Easter dinner and specifically requesting my presence as the guest of honor. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I decided to accept their invitation anyway. This time, when I arrived at the family home, I was greeted at the front door by Dad himself, who practically tripped over his own feet rushing to take my coat. Mom had prepared my old bedroom with fresh flowers and expensive linens. Vanessa, who had somehow managed to keep her job through dedicated hard work and genuine improvement, actually apologized publicly during dinner. I spent so many years convinced that success was about making other people feel small, she admitted, her voice lacking its former sharp edge. Working under your leadership taught me that real achievement comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. The transformation was remarkable. Mr. Morrison had become one of our most reliable department heads once he stopped trying to impress people and started focusing on actual results. The company's client satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and employee morale was at an all-time high. You know, Uncle Charlie mused over dessert, it's funny how things work out. All those years we thought Heather was the family underachiever, she was actually building an empire none of us could have imagined. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most to say, I replied, cutting into Mom's famous apple pie. And sometimes the most successful person is the one who doesn't need to constantly prove their worth to other people. As dinner wound down, Mom approached me privately in the kitchen. I owe you an apology that's about 8 years overdue, she said, her eyes filling with tears. We treated you terribly, and you had every right to cut us out of your life completely. Family is complicated, I told her, loading dishes into the dishwasher. But people can change if they're willing to do the work. Look at Vanessa, she's become an excellent executive once she stopped competing with everyone and started collaborating instead. Later that evening, as I drove home to my penthouse overlooking the harbor, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even with people who wronged you, it's about proving that their opinion of you never mattered in the first place. While they were busy looking down on me, judging my choices and questioning my worth, I was quietly building something extraordinary that would outlast all their petty criticisms and superficial judgments. And the most satisfying part? Next Thanksgiving, I'm hosting dinner at my estate in Martha's Vineyard. All 12,000 square feet of it, with guest suites for everyone and not a single basement in sight. The girl they once banished to the basement had become the woman who owned the entire neighborhood. Sometimes patience and perseverance create the sweetest victories of all.